FindByName method is very useful for referencing an object where you know its name. Maybe it's an object of several, and you don't want to write a ton of code to locate an object, maybe iterating through a list of objects, but you know its name, and so you can use the FindByName and pass it the name of the object, and it will return a reference to the object. So the example here is I'm looking for a button named BTN Go SMCC. I can send it that name, and it'll return that object, and I'm going to identify that object as a button. So I have all the button properties, and then I can say btn.backgroundColor equals colors.yellow. I can manipulate that button. Even though I'm manipulating BTN, it is referencing my BTN Go SMCC. It is the same. Let's take a look at how we could use that in a project. I'm in Visual Studio 2022 for Windows, and I have the Android emulator running with the app I've created called FindByName Demo. And it is simply an animation. I've created a grid with 400 squares. It's 20 rows and 20 columns. And each cell of that grid contains a box view. And I'm using FindByName to randomly locate a box view within that grid. And I'm changing the colors of that box view randomly. I've also created a button where I can pause the animation, so I'm using a iDispatcher timer, and I can resume the animation. Well, let's take a look at the code. So I added the Sego UI fonts, and I'm using those. That's the only resource I've added. Let's take a look at the main page XAML. So in the main page XAML, I've set my background to powder blue. I created a label at the top for my title, which is named FindByName Demo. Set the font size and the margins, and then I have a grid. And this grid has 20 rows and 20 columns, all equally spaced. So I use asterisk for each one of those. And then I create box views in those 400 cells. Now, I did not type in all this code, okay? You could, and you could go through and just change the name for each box view. I use box view 0 as my first one, grid row 0, column 0, and then I have my 20 rows of 0, and then my 20 columns going from 0 through 19. And I repeat that for the other 19 rows. So my names go from BV0 down to BV399. That's my 400 cells. As I said, you could do one, copy and paste and switch. That takes a lot of time. So some of you have seen my trick for using Excel to create code, but let me just visit Excel here for a minute. In Excel, I created at the top a reference to what I wanted to create for each one of those lines for my box views. Parse that out into some literal strings here. There's 4 of them. And then I set up 3 columns, one for the name, one for the row, one for the column. You can use fill down basically to create these very quickly. And then column D, I have code, which is nothing more than a formula of concatenating an absolute reference to A2, the value of my column A, absolute reference of A3, the value of my column B, absolute reference of A4, the value of the cell in column C, and then an absolute reference of A5. So that is my formula. And then all I do is I just grab the little fill box and just dragged it down for my 400 rows. It creates it, and then I simply come over and I basically copy all that. And then I can come over to my XAML code. And just demonstrate if this wasn't here. So this is what I entered as far as my code, and then I simply pasted those 400 statements to create my box views. What I want to do is get these different names. So they're named sequentially. That's important. And we're going to use the numbers of the names to randomly generate which box view we want to alter. So I have a button here that has a clicked event called control animation. I'm setting up for the text of pause animation, gave it a color of red and white and a text of white. Let's take a look at the C# code. So in my C# I created a random object. I created a list of color called palette, and I brought in a iDispatch timer named timer. For my main page, I created a palette of my three different colors I wanted to use. So I used lime, yellow, and royal blue. You could change those colors wherever you like. If you wanted them to all be lime, you can make them all lime. And then I'm going to create a box view. And I'm going to create a string called myBV. And in a loop, I'm going to set myBV equal to a literal string of BV and the value of I as we go through the loop. That's going to go through 0 to 399. And each time through, I'm going to find that target using FindByName. I'm passing it myBV. That's the name that we created in XAML as a box view. I'm going to randomly change that color by creating a color called change color that's being pulled from that palette randomly, value of 0, 1, or 2. So I'm doing rnd.next 3. I'm going to set the target of that color. If rnd.next 2 is equal to 0, I'm going to set it to change color. So, and if it's not, if it's 1, I'm going to set it to colors black. So approximately half of my 400 squares, or 200 of them, should be black. The other 200 will randomly be placed between those three colors. Then I'm going to set up my timer, creating my dispatch timer, setting the time span from microseconds to 1. So this is going to fire 100 times a second. And then adding my method that I created called animate to the tick event and starting my timer. Here's my animation. I'm going to use R&D again to get a integer between 0 and 399. I'm going to call it cell. Then I'm going to set the string of IB name to BV and the value of that cell as a string. Again, I'm going to use FindByName to find that box view. It could be BV0, it could be BV49, it could be BV388. I'm going to set a new color, again pulling randomly from that palette of those three colors, and then setting target.color. If it's currently black, I'm going to set it to a new color. And if it's not black, I'm going to set it to black. And then my control animation button, I'm going to get the text of that button. If it's pause animation, I'm going to stop my timer, set the text of the button to resume animation, and change the background color to green. Otherwise, I'll start my timer again, set the timer back to the text back to pause animation, and set the background color to red. Once again, let's watch this run. Now I could have done this another way, and that is create a list of my 400 box views and randomly pull from that list. And well, I could do that with Excel code as well. I wanted to demonstrate how you might use FindByName. And there's my animation running. I can pause it and I can resume it. So we should see about 100 squares changing per second, although the Android emulator probably is running a little slower than that. So, but it creates a nice little fun animation. Now, another way you could do this is you could have those 400 be labels, each with showing the text of 0 or 1, maybe in a lime color with a black background, and it would look like a little binary display of just zeros and ones changing. So lots of things you could do with this. But I think it's a great use of using FindByName. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the .NET MAUI Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.